Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode, or the first episode of the book club. We've done lots of book review shows here on the channel, and thanks to Ralph, he said, well, why don't we make this maybe somewhat of a regular thing that we just specifically talk about books we've read or a specific book that we've all read. So yeah, we're going to do this periodically from time to time, and it won't necessarily be featured on our normal Wednesday review days. It could happen whenever the mood strikes us. So welcome everybody to the first, I guess, official episode of the book club. We've got in the Zoom with us here today, of course, Count Ralphus himself, Ralph Tamborra from the Hudson Valley Squares, and Mr. Grant Arthur from the Contrarians and Grant's Rock Warehouse, and ranking the albums here and occasionally Hudson Valley Squares and other places. So the reason we have gathered today, and welcome, gentlemen, is to finally get around to talking about My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee, which it's funny, it was actually a couple of weeks ago when we got done doing a Hudson Valley Squares episode that the three of us were on, and towards the end, when most people had already dropped off the Zoom, the three of us got left for last. And I don't even know who brought it up first. Maybe it was you, Ralph, maybe it was you, Grant, mentioned this book, and we were all like, yeah, I'm either done with it or just finishing with it. And everybody was like, all right, why don't we do a review together and talk about this book? So here we are 2-3 weeks later, right? So everybody's done with it. So Ralph, your first thoughts on this book, which really, this is the first time we're hearing from Geddy about his life inside and outside the band and his family history. And there's a lot of that in here and where they're at today. And I think this book is great because it's very current. Basically, he just finished writing this not that long ago. So it basically comes up to within the last year's worth of activity on the Rush front. So your thoughts on this book?
Yeah, over 500 pages, a lot of stuff in this book. A lot of times with these kind of books with music, with musicians, people want to just hear about the band stuff, and I think that's great when you're reading a biography on the book. But when it comes to an autobiography, you want to hear about their childhood and their family. And this book spends a lot of time on his parents, and it's fascinating because I love also reading about history, especially like dark history and true crime and stuff. But this goes into the Holocaust, and the fact that his parents actually meet and have a romance start in Nazi death camps, I think that's a movie and a book in itself. It's fascinating. It's almost unreal. Like when you're reading it, you're like, damn, this is where this guy comes from. And I think it's so important because it's such a big part of his life that he has that as a background. So I really loved it, and he spends plenty of time on the band and stuff, and you get to hear the ins and outs of John Rutsey, the first drummer, that you just don't really hear about too much. Is usually a page or two written about him and in the other kind of books, but it's great hearing that they actually kicked Geddy out early on in the band, because they didn't think he was right as a front man and stuff. And yeah, I mean, this was a really interesting book, and I loved it.
I think you hit on something really interesting, and we've talked about this before. I read a ton of biographies, and you're absolutely right. It's always standard that the book begins where they're telling the story about when they were kids growing up and then eventually moving into the band and beyond. And I always feel like, well, a biographer really doesn't know all this intimate stuff with these rock stars growing up as kids, right? So I tend to be less interested when it's someone writing about someone else and telling those stories. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Hearing Geddy tell these stories about growing up, and he's so self-deprecating where he talks about he's got the big nose and he always looked dorky and all this kind of stuff. He felt like he didn't fit in. That to me was fascinating, and hearing the intricacies of growing up in a very strict religious Jewish household and having his parents coming from, being in the concentration camps and moving over here to North America up to Canada. It's just, that's who you want to tell that story. I don't want Mick Wall telling that story. I don't want anybody else. I want to hear Geddy tell that story.
In a
Grant,
biography, you don't mind it for like 1 or 2 pages, but you don't want it to
you don't
go
want it
on
for the
too
first
long.
80 pages, right? And it's just like, all
Yeah,
right, I want to hear about the band at this point. So here,
yeah,
this is Geddy's story as told by Geddy. I mean, the title couldn't be any better. I remember when I first got this, I was like, oh my God, like look at that weird picture of him, right? It's like he's very young, he's got
Mhm.
nipples and everything, and my effing life, and then the cool back. I was like, but you know what? This whole book is set up where the title, I think, was absolute genius. Do you agree, Grant? I mean, it's
Oh,
just
100%. Absolutely brilliant. It's when you read the book, it's very intimate. It's like you're sitting down having a cup of coffee with Geddy and we're just talking. That's the type of conversation it is. You feel like you get to know him. It is a must have for if you're a fan of Rush because you're getting not only are you getting his family history, but you're also getting intimate details about Rush. Who knew that Alex Lifeson liked pot so much? I had no idea. But you get you know what it's like to be on the road with them and what they had to put up with. There are ups, there are downs. It pulls at your heart. You laugh during the book, because Getty, he did this with his collaborator Daniel Richler. So I don't know how much he did, but I know that they had a lot of emails prior building up to this. But I think it's well written, enjoyable. If you've got this book and you've got these books, you're good to go, I think. As far as Rush, they're all books that you need to have in your canon, so to speak. But I think it's brilliant. And I read it once. I think it's well worth reading again because there's so
probably.
much info and detail. Getty is just a pleasure, you know?
Were you guys surprised at all with the amount of uh, drug stories told? Because
I
I think
thought,
me growing up and even in later years, there's always been this impression, and maybe that's due to the band never talking about it or other bands not talking about that Rush were the guys that didn't go hang out and go to all the parties, and they didn't go hang out and get loaded with UFO and all those other bands they toured with, and they were just like they were the ones who were like, no, after the show they hang out in the tour bus and they by themselves read their books and all that kind of stuff, and then you read
mhm,
this and you're like, that really was.
party.
Hey, there was a lot of cocaine going on here. There's a lot of tripping on acid going on here. And up
Yeah.
to this day, we found out, like you said, Alex is a total stoner guy. I, I was like,
Well,
wow.
seeing his appearances later in the Trailer Park Boys, if you ever watched that show, just the fact that he'd be on that show and that show was all about pot, So I kind of knew that, and just from when they were growing up and going to see Led Zeppelin and all that kind of stuff, that's just the way the culture was back then. So it didn't surprise me, but like you said, though, you never really hear about it. It's not in the biographies much, or any,
No.
great
Yeah.
hearing those stories.
I think for me, and everybody growing up in the rock and roll world, right? If you're into music and stuff, most kids experiment with stuff. That's just the way it is. We all did. But I think for me, I was more kind of shocked to hear of the cocaine years, right? So in this all throughout moving pictures and signals, and Getty talks pretty candidly about how they were doing a good amount of cocaine from like what hemispheres up until signals, and until he reached the point where he's like, I gotta get off this train. Enough is enough.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's one of the smarter ones, right? But I also, to me, I think one of the strengths of this book is the emotion that's behind it, and especially dealing with what Neil went through with the loss of his wife and child, and then him getting sick, and that to me was the heaviness of this book, and you really get a sense for how close these three guys were.
Yeah.
They weren't just bandmates. These were brothers. They got Alex and Geddy grew up together. Got Neil joined up shortly thereafter, and there was a bond between these three guys. And I think that he doesn't downplay that at all. And I think you really get a sense for how different they all were as individuals, but yet that made for the dynamic in the band. You really get a sense for how much of a loner Neil was and very private person. You get a sense for how forceful and take charge Geddy was. You get a sense for how kind of aloof Alex was at times. Um, I don't know. I was fascinated by this book all the way through, and I think like one of you said, you almost feel like you were sitting down
Oh,
hearing it from Geddy's mouth. And all of a sudden, you're like, after sitting down with him for a couple hours, you're like, wow, I really feel like I really know this guy now, you know?
yeah. There's a lot of tragedy in the book, a lot of death, but that's expected for someone who's lived a long time. And the longer you live, the more you got to deal with that. But he keeps his sense of humor throughout the book too. So it's like It'll be a sad section, then it'll be something funny. And even stuff like with Neil Peart, he signs Colbert's hand. He gives him the autographs on his hand, and he says to him, "I don't want to see that up on eBay." Like you don't realize how even Neil's very funny too. And it's he's a very lovable character. I've read a couple other books that are like that, where when you're reading it, you're hearing his voice as you're reading. I felt the same way with Brian Johnson, and even the David Lee Roth book. Like you could hear their voice telling these stories, and
Yeah.
it's almost like watching a long documentary reading. Even though it's a 500-page book, you don't feel it doesn't feel like that.
The
No.
Steve Lukather book was like that as well. I really felt like I was sitting down listening to him talk for a bunch of hours, and that's what I like. I like that kind of autobiography. The one thing that this book doesn't really get into, and I guess he wants you to go read his book all about bass collecting. But Grant, were you at all a little maybe missing the fact that he didn't talk about why he loved Rickenbacker basses for so long, why he went back to Fender precision bass? I mean,
I
he
don't.
doesn't really talk about gear
I wish he would have.
right?
Well,
Talks
the
about
whole
the
record.
keyboards a lot. The keyboards he gets into, but he doesn't talk a lot about, and again, maybe he feels that he already covered that because he did a whole book on basses. But for the people who maybe are never going to read that, I would like just a
Yeah.
little bit, maybe a
Yeah.
chapter.
Some of us know why he played Rickenbackers because he was a big Chris Squire fan.
Of
He
course, yeah.
loved Chris Squire.
But not the common
No
person.
one knows that.
Yeah,
But he had influences, and I never knew why he switched over to the jazz bass. I have no idea.
I think
I was this close to going to that book signing that he did for the bass book. The same place where I met Tony Iommi and the guys from Kiss and Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols. A bunch of people, they all go to this place in New Jersey, and they do this bookstore signing. But for his bass book, it was like a $75 book, but I didn't care. I was going to go and get it anyway just to meet him. And then it turns out he only had like a limited of 80 people were allowed to go, and you had to sign
Huh.
up. So we were like all gearing up to go, and then we were like, oh, it's already sold out. Like usually a book signing, they want to sell as many books as they can.
for sure, yeah, yeah.
That one, it was very limited, and 80 lucky people got to go down there and meet him. It would have been really cool to meet him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I never picked up that book. I still want it, but it was hefty price tag. I'm going,
Yeah, I'd like to check it out.
I'd like to check it out. His
Yeah,
collection
that's
is
really all I
something.
missed from this is a little. I would have liked a little more gear talk. I obviously he went in pretty in depth on keyboards and synthesizers and things, but I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about collecting Rickenbacker basses and the double neck, and I because I think he hinted that the reason he switched over from the Rickenbacker was because one of the producers they were working with in the mid late 80s wanted a different kind of sound from him, something a little punchier, because the Rickenbacker's got a certain it's a Rickenbacker when you hear it, right?
Yeah, it's the only bass it
It's a
sounds
Benny
like
jazz
that.
bass. Yeah, yeah. There's a big difference between the two, and I think he just kind of wanted to get a different sound from him, whoever the producer was. I remember which one. And then Geddy kind of never really went back, right? I mean, he toyed with Steinbergers for a few years in the mid
The
'80s.
Wall.
Yeah, yeah.
On the R40 tour, he was bringing Ricks back out.
Yeah, much later on, I think, but that was perfect for that tour because
But people dig it though. People wanting to play that.
Oh, hell yeah!
And they want Alex and Geddy to play the double necks. And they brought him out. He had that Rickenbacker double neck that was absolutely beautiful.
Yep, yep.
Oh, but that was such a great tour. I'm so glad I went. And I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
thought that was going to be the last thing, but I didn't know Neil was going to pass away. No one knew. Glad
yeah.
I went. But yeah,
Yeah.
I could have used some more guitar talk in here. That'd been nice.
Well, now I guess we got to wait for the Alex to do a book, right? Is that ever going to happen? I wonder because
I don't.
I would like to read. I would like to read.
What I did like in this book is how they talked about the albums. Like, during Caress of Steel, it was literally recorded in a hash haze. They were doing a lot of hash in
Yeah,
Caress of Steel. And he would mention how he would sit with Terry Brown because it was pretty much Geddy and Terry Brown pretty much producing things. It doesn't say that, but he would sit there with Terry Brown and go, "Hey, can you do this? Can you do this?" Always pushing the envelope. I mean,
yeah.
Geddy was always the one in the band pushing things. I don't know if he was the leader, but if you kind of read things, and we went to the My Effin Life book tour in Chicago, and you kind of get the idea that he was really the dominant one. Alex was just kind of aloof a lot of time. Just, I'm not saying, anything derogatory, but Geddy was really the major force in the band, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's the impression that I got. And I for some reason I always thought that Neil was kind of the guy, right? I guess you
I
assume the guy
know.
who's writing all the lyrics is the guy who's kind of running things, and it was Geddy pretty
It
much.
was Geddy pretty
Yeah.
much. Though they were, like you said, Pete, they were brothers. They loved each other. And you can really pick that up in the book. They were brothers. And it's very touching. And they had a lot of fun. They had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'll
They
give
do
you
kind
that.
of some of those Rush albums though. There's some that he barely mentions in there. But
Mhm.
that's why we got all these other books where they go into depth about every album and song. You don't need that so much with them. I'd rather hear like intimate like tour stories. Like I love the Gene Simmons story where they had the groupies in the room and they were bored with Alex wearing the bag on his head and Ace Frehley's all stoned, and then Gene's in there with the girls and the girls aren't into it, and they kick the girls out, and Gene like pushes Geddy against the wall like, what's wrong with you? Like that's the only thing in the world that mattered to Gene was that, and they were like, no, she's bringing the party down, we don't want them in here. I thought that was fascinating to hear that because they always talk good about Kiss,
Yeah,
even
Oh,
in
yeah.
this book good, but that's one story you never heard before, and that
I
was
know.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, and as far as the albums go, yeah, I mean, there's certain albums that he talks a little bit more about than others. What I really enjoyed, he spent a lot of time talking about Clockwork Angels, the last album, and how
Mhm.
much that album means to all three of them, and they felt it was a great achievement. And it's funny because when I got done reading that chapter, I'm like, God, I haven't listened to Clockwork Angels in a while. Let me go put it on. So that day, I went to the gym and I listened to Clockwork Angels while I was working out, and I was like, man, this album is even better than I remember it, and it wasn't that long since I had last heard it, maybe like a year or two. But I was like, geez, this is a really, really good album. And I think I had a newfound perspective of the album based on the things that he was talking about, the album,
Mhm.
the creation of the album. So I was like, ooh, this is a really good album. This is like one of the best final albums in any band's catalog.
Yeah, I
Absolutely, it's
think,
one of my favorite Rush albums. I never
yeah,
stopped
it's
listening to
great.
it since it came out. Seen him on that tour, and I love that album. I always go back to it.
Yeah.
But
Bass,
there's one thing I want to mention though, real quick, before I forget, is that the images in this book, you're getting a view into their lives that you've never ever seen before. And it's only in the book. Like if you have I keep wanting to say books on tape, but you gentlemen know what I mean. You don't get that. You actually have to have the book because there's just all these backstage photos and oh my, it's just absolutely wonderful. It's
Yeah.
just
I
wonderful.
love this picture. If you could see it, it's him
With the
as a little
Beatle
kid
albums.
holding the Beatles album,
Yep.
and it's right in chapter one, and this book kind of comes full circle because the very end of the book, he's hanging out with Paul McCartney, and Paul McCartney's trying to get him to get back out there and get out there, play again, and you got to keep going with it. And I just thought that was amazing. And there he is as a little kid with the book. Then the very end of the book, he's hanging out with his hero and being encouraged to go back out there and do it.
What's also great is that all these cool pictures throughout the book have like a little blurb or piece of commentary from him.
Mhm.
I laughed at this one for like 15 minutes after it. So I'm going to show you the picture right there. It's him and his what's that, his sister, I think. Yeah, him and his sister when he was really young. And then I'll read you the caption. It says, in every early picture I have of me, I look like a total doofus. Either my pants are up to my tits or my corduroys have checkered cuffs. And with that haircut, I can imagine people saying, oh, the poor boy, where did they get him from? Hilarious. That is so funny. And it's just, you look at these pictures when he's a kid, I'm like, oh, Lord. It's like the way they have him dressed and the haircuts and everything. And yeah, plus I mean, he's the first one to tell you he's a funny looking dude, right? So, yeah,
Really cool how he meets his for like pretty much his first girlfriend and
Mhm.
ends up partner forever. I thought that was pretty cool story too.
yeah. And on that note too, it takes a lot of balls to really give the intimate details of your relationship with your significant other to the entire universe. And they had a tough time of it for many, many years. And it's all laid out here. So I'm sure, he had to convince his wife to tell those stories. And granted, they're in a much better place today, but man, for decades they had, it's on the road all the time and everything else, and making the albums and the band, and she's home and she's got a career and kids to raise, and he's never home, and
It's tough,
yeah, yeah.
but you feel it reading the book. It's
You
just,
do, you really
it's
do.
so intimate that,
Yeah.
but I'm glad he touched on that stuff because, Rush fans would like to know. But I want to say that this book, you don't have to be a Rush fan to read this book. I mean, just the information on the Holocaust, and it's just a great piece of literature, You don't have to be a Rush fan. There's plenty there for you to enjoy. So,
Yeah. I would even think, even if you know who Rush are and you don't really like Rush's music or albums, you probably would really like this story because it's
If
about person.
you're an aspiring musician, even if you don't like the music, it's good for that too. Because I
mhm.
mean, the way they stuck it out, it could have all ended. They put all their money onto one album. If that didn't do it, that was going to be it. And luckily, that one did it, and then they were able to keep going, and they had such an amazing career.
Yeah,
Really
it's a
amazing.
great story of perseverance and being real smart with following trends or starting trends or knowing when it's time to maybe do something a little bit different. Some people love that about Rush. Some people don't. Some people wanted Rush to do, 10,000 different Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres albums, right? But Rush were very smart in, every couple of albums, every time a new decade comes around, well, we need to kind of reinvent ourselves. Let's utilize all the modern technology and let's kind of make our music relevant in a new decade and so on. And so you look at their career and you have all these little eras, right? Most of them are separated by live albums too. It's weird how that works out, but they just
Mhm.
kept reinventing themselves over and over and over again and kept their music fresh for new listeners, loyal listeners. And, some people drop off here and there. That happens. But I think as the years went on, I mean, they were still a really big band when they called it quits on after that last tour. I mean, they're selling out big arenas. I saw them in Madison Square Garden and place was packed. And so, their popularity really never waned at all, which is a testament to, them as people and as musicians and songwriters. So
After having people in the contrarians in my channel, we've had a lot of discussions about Rush. You've had to, but it all depends upon almost where you come into Rush, because some of the younger people that are on our channels, they'll look at it and think the '80s period is just absolutely stunning, or
yeah,
the '90s period, or 2000s, for crying out loud. It all kind of depends upon where you come in. Me, I'm old school. I came in on Hemisphere, so that's kind of my, everybody's said that. Oh, well, I like this stuff. 2112, but it just depends upon where you come in.
yeah,
They have fans all over in different age groups, and it's just amazing. So you definitely want to check this book out if you haven't.
yep, I would agree. It's
Like how he goes into like their style, how they never had it knew what the style should be for the look of the band, and I found that funny. They're in a mall and they see Caminos, and they're like, "Oh, let's wear them." And I think like as a kid finding Rush, like I loved moving pictures as a kid, and
Mhm.
I went back, but I didn't that much. But then all of a sudden in the '80s on MTV and stuff, and their look was so goofy in the early '90s and late '80s that it turned me off. Like I couldn't listen to the music because of how weird they looked to me. And but then like come Vapor Trails and stuff like that, they start just being normal and going out. And I wish
Mhm.
they would have had that look the whole time. I would have been able to accept the music. I know it's a stupid way to look at music, but when you're a kid, especially being a little metalhead, I didn't want to see guys with the skinny tie and the flock of seagulls. Like,
See, I dug that.
I hated
Alex had it. You remember he had that flock of seagulls kind of swoopy hairdo? Couldn't
yeah,
see his face practically, and had a little skinny tie. They look so new wave. But
yeah,
if you
yeah, that's
think about moving pictures, there are hints of new wave on there. There's hints of the Police. There's different influences that were all coming into the band at the time.
well,
But so they
that
were
was
wearing
that
it.
was a transition album for them, big time.
Yeah. And it
Yeah,
shows, especially on the live concert footage or the photos from that era,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
I don't know. I kind of dug it, but hey, whatever they did then, it was successful. So got to hand
true.
it to them.
Yeah, true. So there you have it. Our thoughts on My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee. So if you haven't read it, as you can tell, we highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite autobiographies that I've read in recent memory. Really, really good. And as Grant said, probably worth a reread at some point. Once my stack of books to be read kind of gets down a little bit, I may revisit this. But and that never happens. You ever notice that? If you're a voracious reader, that stack never goes down. It's like always like, yeah, I'm going to read that again in a couple months, and then I'm like, oh, but I have 15 sitting here I got to get to, and that stack. You read 3 or 4 of them, and then you buy 5 more, and it's like the stack just stays at like a certain height, never changes, never changes.
Terrible, terrible.
But it's good to still be able to read. I think I don't understand people who say they have no time to read, or they don't read books and haven't read books, and I'd rather just watch something. I'm like, oh man, reading is something that everybody should still do, at least a little bit. That's just my
Especially the music books. The music books, when you read a book, then you hear a song and you kind of remember hearing how he wrote the song or what the song's really about, and it gives it a new meaning to it, you know. And
yeah.
if you're not a big fan of a band, it's good to know every little bit of it. Sometimes you might not want to know every little bit of it, but
Oh, I love it all.
I didn't need to hear about Rob Halfort's reasoning behind Jawbreaker. Like I could have did without no. I always thought that was about punching someone in the face, and I was like,
And then you're like, oh no, I can't unsee that now.
But I see if you read like stories like the Caress of Steel story, you hear all about them making the record. It makes you want to revisit that album because you can probably listen to it with a different listening experience. You could take it in differently. If those stories are just, it's just gold. I love hearing all that stuff, you know?
I agree. I agree.
There was a Beatle book that came out years ago by Mark Lewison called Recording Sessions, The Beatles. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it goes through day by day every session, tells you what they did, what got mixed, what got recorded, what guitars, and all the studio photography that was taken at Abbey Road. They didn't take a lot of photos at Abbey Road when the Beatles were in the studio, but it's a fascinating read because it's just like a diary of what they did in the studio. Man,
I
I would
have a Hendrix book
love,
that's
I don't know if
like
there's something like that for Rush, but boy, I would love to have it.
I got a Hendrix book that's like that every day. Him
Yeah.
going to Electric Ladyland Studios. He worked on this song, this song, this song. And then when all these years later, all these albums kept coming out with Hendrix, you wonder when did this all happen? When you read this book, it's like every day he was in there working on something, and now it's all on tape. So they pieced it all together and keep coming out with a new album every few years.
I know.
Yeah.
Jimmy's a fascinating person. I have read that's one of those guys that like
Love Jimmy.
I never get tired of reading a new book on Hendrix. I have so many of them, and I just keep getting them and reading them, and everyone tells you a little bit more, and it's fascinating. With the Beatles, Grant, that's cool you brought them up because I always want to read more stuff about the Beatles, but there are so many Beatles books. I never know which ones to get.
Yeah, and the thing with the Beatles, I never talk about the Beatles on my channel because what more can I add? Everything they've been talked to death. I love the Beatles. That's my number one, but they've been talked about so much. But that recording session book is just fascinating because you
Yeah,
just
that
get
sounds-
that glimpse into their daily what they did they recorded a lot. They'd go out and play shows, go back right immediately, start recording again. I don't know how they did it. I mean, it's just like, holy cow. It was the 60s. It was busy.
Yeah, it
You
was.
know?
So before we go, Grant wanted to plug
Oh,
a show that he did on his channel relating to this. So you want to talk about that? We'll drop the link down below.
yeah. Late last year, I went to the Chicago show for Geddy's My Effin Life book tour, and we had someone else on our show that went to the Detroit show. So we got some fellow contrarians. We've got some Grants Rock Warehouse folks and some Rush fans. And we all got together and talked about our experience on the show and what we got out of it and just talked about Geddy and everything. So I'm putting the link, I'm gonna have Pete put the link down below. So check that out on my channel because it's just fascinating. If you didn't get to go on the book tour to see Geddy, this might be something else. If you read this book, you big bet. If you're a Rush fan, just check it out because we had a wonderful, I'll never forget that show. It was like what I said before. The book is very much like the book tour. Geddy is talking to you. You feel like you're sitting right there with Geddy talking about something.
Yeah.
He's just that kind of person though.
I should have gone to the New York one.
Yeah.
In
I see some
hindsight.
footage on YouTube of some of the book tour stuff. Yeah, it looked like a cool thing to do.
Oh, it was wonderful. I'm glad I went. Of course, I could have went to the Cleveland show, but everybody was more from that area, and some of us flew in. I flew into Chicago, met everybody. We had a great time. So, but
That's
it was well worth seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would assume that more of these guys are going to do that sort of thing. That seems to be the norm now, to do these like either like book tours or like Bruce Dickinson from Maiden just did that whole tour where he
Mhm.
talks and is just telling stories. I mean, that's what it's all about. Because some of these guys, when they're all done touring and making records and stuff, they got to have something to do. So why not write a book and go and talk about their lives in front of audiences, because they love being in front of audiences, right?
I don't know why Kiss doesn't do that. Think of all those crazy Kiss
Well, they
fans.
should, right? They should.
But
I don't personally,
Geddy,
I don't want to see Kiss avatars. I would rather
no.
see Gene and Ace and Paul and Peter doing a tour where they just sit and tell their life story.
Could you imagine just telling road stories? I know there were books out, but it's a little bit different when you can have the artists up there telling their own story. It's very impactful and
Yeah.
it's intimate. Fans
They
love
might have
that
done a
stuff.
little bit of that at those Kiss conventions.
Oh, or
Like
on
they
the
did a little
cruise,
bit.
on the Kiss cruise.
Yeah. How many
I
uh
met
how many people were in the audience for the Geddy thing you went to?
It was pretty much full. The where we were in Chicago is at the auditorium, and it's like 3 levels. They didn't really sell any on the third level, but it was packed. The second level and the
Like
first level, packed.
5,000 people?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So
And there's a beautiful, beautiful building, beautiful, stunning.
there's an audience for this type of thing,
Hmm.
you know? So cool. Well, if you've read it, let us know what you think of the book down in the comments below. If you're in the middle of it or you haven't read it, you're going to read it. Whenever you do, come back, comment down below. Let us know what you think of My Effin' Life. And we'll see you next time here on another little book show here with the book club. And we'll have revolving people coming on this from time to time. So I think it'll be fun. And thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together, all the damn
All the
time.
damn
Please
time.
subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell to get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Don't forget Grant's Rock Warehouse as well as the Contrarians. Go check that out as well. You'll see all of us. You'll see Ralph and I in the Hudson Valley Squares. Grant and I are going to be doing some ranking shows coming up again. We got Badfinger coming up in just a couple of weeks. So lots happening here on the channel. Don't forget In the Prog Seat coming up this Tuesday. And we've also got the UK Connection coming up in just a couple hours. So don't miss that either. Ranking the albums tomorrow. And then the work week begins once again. I'm Pete Pardo for Grant, Arthur, and Count Ralphus. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching.